The probate courtroom smelled of burnt coffee and old paper, with something sharper underneath that morning as my grandmother's will glowed on the screen, and the linen envelope sat heavy in my lap. My mother had just sworn that I'd manipulated my dying grandmother out of $6.8 million until my attorney slid a notarized bank summary across the table, and her face changed before she could say another word. My name is Elise Mercer. I'm 35 years old. I'm a forensic accountant, and this is the story of how my mother sued me over my grandmother's $6.8 million will, because she thought being the quiet daughter meant I would be the easy one to corner. Welcome back to Reddit Drama Stories. If you've ever been the reliable one in a family that only remembers your name when a form needs to be signed, stay with me. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. To make sense of that moment, I need to take you back to Cedar Grove, Indiana, to a yellow kitchen with linoleum floors that clicked under hard-soled shoes, and a window over the sink that always fogged in winter because my mother boiled coffee on the stove long after other people had switched to drip machines. Our house smelled like lemon polish, hairspray, and whatever my mother thought company should smell when it was rubbed into every surface hard enough. She believed in appearances the way some people believed in scripture. The right casserole dish, the right curtains, the right child in the family photo. That child was never me. My younger brother Owen was bright, handsome, and born with the kind of careless charm that made adults lean toward him. He was all elbows and baseball cleats and half-finished promises, forever trailing red dirt across the back hall while people laughed and called him spirited. I was the one who stacked coupons in date order, sharpened pencils without being asked, and remembered which utility bill had to go out on the 15th. My mother, Diane, had auburn hair. She touched every 7 minutes and long square nails that clicked against countertops when she was irritated, which was often. She sold real estate when the market was good, blamed the market when it wasn't, and had a smile that worked beautifully on strangers and almost never on me. By the time I was 9, she had a line she used so often it became the soundtrack of my childhood. "You're good with paperwork, Hannah. That's all." She said it the first time I remember feeling properly erased. I was 10, standing on a step stool at Thanksgiving because we were one chair short, though somehow there was room for Owen's travel ball coach, who smelled like Old Spice and turkey grease, and laughed with his mouth open. I can still feel the rough painted edge of that stool against the back of my calves and taste the sweet potato casserole cooling into paste in my mouth, while my mother pointed at a stack of place, cards I had lettered by hand in blue ink, and said, "See, you're good with paperwork, Hannah. That's all. Let the boys sit." Everybody heard her. Nobody corrected her. My grandmother, Ruth Albright, looked at me over the rim of her water glass and didn't say anything then, but when plates were being cleared, she pressed 2 buttermints into my palm as if compensation could be folded that small. She said it again when I was 12, and Owen forgot a science project that was due the next morning. A model bridge made of balsa wood and hot glue that should have been his responsibility and immediately became mine. I stayed up at the dining room table until 1:10 a.m., with glue strings stuck to my fingers and the smell of scorched cardboard in the room because the lampshade had been too close to the bulb, and when I handed the finished project over, my mother didn't say thank you. She smoothed Owen's collar, kissed his forehead, and told me, "You're good with paperwork, Hannah. That's all. Some people are builders. Some people are support." The third time is the one I remember most clearly, because it carried the clean edge of humiliation only public moments can have. I was 16. I had won a statewide business math competition, and the awards breakfast was held in a hotel ballroom that smelled like coffee, syrup, and industrial carpet shampoo. I wore a navy cardigan because it was the nicest thing I owned, and I kept checking the ballroom doors for my mother. She arrived 23 minutes late in a beige trench coat, slid into the back of the room just as my name was called, and spent the entire award presentation texting under the table because Owen had a batting cage appointment she didn't want to miss. On the drive home, with the plaque lying warm across my knees from the sun through the windshield, she said, almost kindly, "You know this is nice, Hannah, but numbers don't make people remember you. You're good with paperwork. That's all." When people ask now whether my grandmother saw what was happening, I tell them the truth. Yes, she saw almost all of it. My grandmother Ruth lived 12 minutes away in a brick ranch house with hydrangeas in the front beds and a cedar chest at the foot of her bed that smelled like lavender sachets, old wool, and the sweet, dry scent of wood that had been holding secrets longer than I had been alive. She had been a bookkeeper for my grandfather's farm equipment business before they sold it. And after he died, she turned quiet competence into capital with a steadiness I only understood later. She bought 2 small commercial buildings when downtown property was cheap. She held dividend stocks. She tracked every expense in a red leather ledger with dates so neat they looked engraved. When I was little, she let me sit at her kitchen table with a pencil and show me how to reconcile a bank statement by hand. "People forget what they said," she used to murmur, sliding a canceled check across the table toward me. "Paper remembers. In my family, that was the closest thing we had to grace." The event that made me leave happened 6 weeks after my high school graduation, on a humid Sunday in July when the air felt thick enough to drink and the dining room smelled like roast chicken, black pepper, and the candle my mother always lit when she wanted dinner to look more stable than the people sitting around it. I had a partial scholarship to Indiana University and a work-study slot already lined up in the bursar's office. I had been told since I was 14 that there was a college account for me, not a large one, but enough to cover what the scholarship wouldn't. I had the acceptance packet in a folder beside my chair. My orientation date was circled in blue. Halfway through dinner, while I was still chewing a bite of green beans, I remember, because I never finished them, my mother set down her fork, folded her napkin, and told me in the same tone she used to discuss insurance deductibles that there would be a change in plans. Owen had been recruited for an expensive private baseball showcase in Florida. There were fees, travel costs, equipment, hotel deposits, all the language of investment wrapped around a teenage boy's good arm. The college account, she said, had been used to help make that happen. My stepfather Tom stared at the condensation running down his iced tea glass like it had become fascinating. Owen said nothing at all. My mother looked directly at me and said, "You're good with paperwork, Hannah. You'll figure out loans. Owen has a real shot. Money should go where it can grow." I did not argue. I did not slam my hand down. I did not ask how long they had known before deciding to tell me over a Sunday chicken dinner. I looked at the condensation ring under my water glass until its edges blurred, and in my head I heard every earlier version of that sentence clicking into place like a lock. Useful, not chosen. Capable, therefore available. The betrayal wasn't that the money was gone. It was that they had always assumed my competence made me less deserving of care. After dessert, which I did not eat, my grandmother found me standing in the backyard beside the chain-link fence where the tomato plants were tied with white strips of old t-shirt. The evening smelled like cut grass and hot dirt and citronella smoke from the torch by the patio. She pressed a folded check into my hand for $2,500 and said, "This won't fix their choice. It will only help you survive it." Then she looked toward the kitchen window, where my mother's silhouette moved back and forth with that familiar briskness, and added, "Do not confuse being needed with being loved." I carried that sentence longer than I carried my luggage. 3 days later, I packed 2 pairs of jeans, my navy cardigan, 1 set of bedsheets, my graphing calculator, the acceptance folder from Indiana University, and the red ledger my grandmother gave me as a graduation gift because she said every woman deserved one place in the world where the numbers stayed honest. I had $1,842 in my savings account. The zipper on my duffel bag stuck halfway, and I had to press my knee into the side to close it. The house smelled like coffee and bleach that morning. My mother didn't come out of her room to say goodbye. I rented half of a basement room from a retired nurse named Mrs. Talbot, who kept peppermint candies in a crystal bowl and watched British mysteries at a volume too high for the size of the television. I worked at the bursar's office in the mornings, cleaned classrooms on campus at night for a semester, and learned how to make soup from almost nothing. I took student loans with interest rates I can still recite because fear made me memorize them. I studied at a library desk under fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly above me. With the smell of dust and toner in the air and my grandmother's ledger open beside my textbooks like another kind of syllabus. By 22, I had finished my accounting degree with honors. By 24, I was a staff auditor in Indianapolis, taking inventory counts in warehouses that smelled like pallet wood, motor oil, and burnt coffee from vending machines older than I was. By 27, I had passed the CPA exam and moved into forensic accounting because I discovered, with a kind of cold clarity, that fraud made emotional sense to me in a way ordinary bookkeeping never had. Families lied in patterns. Businesses lied in patterns. Most of the time, the story people told about money and the story the documents told about money were not the same story at all. By 31, I had my certified fraud examiner credential and led asset tracing matters for divorce cases, probate disputes, and small business embezzlement. By 33, I had bought a narrow brick townhome with squeaky oak floors, a dented mailbox, and a kitchen window that faced west so hard sunsets poured through it like melted brass. By 35, I was managing a litigation support team and billing at a rate that would have sounded like fiction to the girl on the Thanksgiving stool. Through all of it, my grandmother stayed steady. She mailed birthday cards in blue envelopes with my name written in the same upright hand she used on ledgers and deposit slips. She called on Sundays at 7:30 p.m. Sharp, so punctual I could have set a clock by her. She asked real questions. What are you building? Are you sleeping enough? Have you reviewed your retirement contributions? When my mother called, which she did only in practical emergencies, she still used the same old line, as if it were a compliment instead of a wound. You're good with paperwork, Hannah. It always meant something was about to be placed in my hands that should have remained in somebody else's. I went home for weddings and funerals, and the occasional Christmas Eve if I could arrive late and leave early. I got good at sitting in living rooms that smelled like cinnamon candles and old resentment. Owen drifted in and out of jobs, charm mostly intact, consequences mostly deferred. My mother's real estate career expanded and contracted with the market and her appetite for risk. There were refinances, a home equity line, then another. By the time I was in my 30s, I could read the signs in her conversation the way a doctor might read lab results. She asked casual questions too casually. She talked about equity events and bridge periods and temporary cash compression with the overbright tone of someone trying to rename a leak before it became a flood. Then my grandfather's last commercial building sold, and the family math changed. The first call came on a Tuesday in late September, just after I had come home from a deposition prep meeting and was still standing in my kitchen with my heels off and my laptop bag on the counter. I could smell rain coming through the cracked window over the sink, that metallic wet smell the whole city gets before a storm. My mother's voice when I answered was warm in a way that instantly made me suspicious. Not kind, warm, there is a difference. Hannah, she said, drawing out the second syllable like she hadn't used my name in months. I was just thinking about how good you are with details. The warmth wasn't for me. It never had been. My grandmother had fallen in her garage and fractured her wrist. It wasn't catastrophic, but it had forced the larger conversation everyone had been avoiding. She was 87 then, still sharp, still living independently, but the edges of daily life had started to fray. Prescription renewals, property tax notices, insurance rider deadlines. Tenants in one of the downtown buildings. my mother, suddenly overwhelmed by the administrative weight of an old woman's well-managed life, wanted help. More precisely, she wanted me to step into the part of the story where there was work to be done while she remained center stage in the emotional version. The first afternoon I went over, the house smelled like Earl Grey tea and the vapor rub my grandmother kept in a blue tin beside her bed. Her right wrist was in a brace. The mail was stacked in a tidy pile on the dining room table, and my mother had already started opening envelopes without any system at all, slicing them from the side so half the pages inside had snagged tears across the top margin. It gave me physical pain to look at. Owen was there too, pretending to adjust the Wi-Fi router while glancing at the contents of a brokerage statement he definitely should not have been touching. "How much is this account worth now?" he asked, too casually. My grandmother answered before I could. "Enough for me." She had always had a dry voice, the kind that didn't rise when other people wanted drama, and it cut through the room with the clean efficiency of a paper knife. Owen laughed like he'd only been making conversation. My mother touched my elbow and lowered her voice. "You know how she gets. Would you just take over the paperwork for a while?" The phrase settled over us like something rotten and familiar. For the next 9 months, I handled what should have been handled. I created a bill pay calendar. I inventoried insurance renewals. I digitized decades of property records and put them in password-protected folders. I logged prescriptions and appointment dates. I accompanied my grandmother to her estate attorney twice, once for a trust review and once for a healthcare directive update. I did these things because she asked me to, because I was competent, and because competence is not the same as surrender, even if my family had always treated it that way. That was when the questions sharpened. My mother wanted to know whether the brokerage accounts had transfer on death designations. She wanted to know if the lake house on Morse Reservoir was titled solely in my grandmother's name or held in trust. She asked whether the downtown properties had appreciated significantly and whether the current will was still the old one. She used the word old in a voice that suggested inconvenience rather than time. The smell of her perfume would hit me before she entered a room, white florals and powder and something synthetic, and then the questions would begin, carefully wrapped in concern. One evening, after Owen had left muddy shoe prints in the garage, and my mother was in the kitchen, whispering too loudly into her phone, my grandmother asked me to sit down at the table. The table had a water ring on one corner from a planter she never bothered refinishing, and the overhead light cast a yellow circle that made her hands look more fragile than they were. She slid a blue envelope toward me. "If anything happens to me," she said, "Mr. Bell has the originals. These are copies and my notes. I want you as executor." I looked at her. "Mom will hate that." "She hates a great many correct things," she said. Inside the envelope was a summary sheet in her handwriting. Assets, approximate values, beneficiaries, attorney contact information, trust amendments by date. The number at the bottom was $6.8 million, estimated gross estate value net of routine expenses, but before final tax and administrative costs. Seeing it written out on her cream stationery made me sit back in my chair. It was not that I didn't know she was comfortable. I did. But comfort is not the same thing as magnitude. There were brokerage accounts, treasury ladders, the lake house, 2 commercial buildings still held, municipal bonds, cash. And there, clipped behind the asset summary, was a separate page, lifetime support provided to Diane Mercer and Owen Mercer. It listed tuition help, mortgage bailouts, a condo down payment, delinquent tax payments, business bridge loans, and direct transfers over 19 years. Total, $2,137,400. I remember the room being very quiet after that, quiet enough that I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen and the slow scrape of tree branches against the back window. "She knows," my grandmother said, meaning my mother. "She has always known. She just believes prior access creates future entitlement." That line would matter later. When my grandmother's health declined the following spring, It happened the way decline often does in old age, not in one cinematic collapse, but in a series of small humiliations that gathered force. Pneumonia, a brief hospital stay, discharge, fatigue, another fall, this time no broken bone, just a new caution in the way she rose from chairs. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic wipes, warm plastic, and the overcooked broccoli from the dinner tray she never touched. I documented medication changes in the Notes app on my phone, the way I did for clients whose timelines later became court exhibits. My mother cried loudly by the bed when nurses were present and stopped crying the moment they stepped out. Owen showed up carrying coffee neither of them drank and asked me, in the hallway outside radiology, whether estate stuff had been updated recently. I looked at him until he looked away. My grandmother died on October 14, just after 4 a.m., while a storm moved through the county hard enough to rattle the windows in the hospice unit. I was there. Her room was dim. The hallway lights under the door made a pale gold rectangle on the floor. Her hand felt cool and dry in mine, papery and light. The morphine pump clicked softly. Her last fully coherent sentence to me the evening before had been simple. Do not let confusion wear my face. I closed her fingers around the edge of the blanket after she was gone and sat in that room until sunrise made the rain-streaked glass look white. I did not cry there. Not then. I called the nurse. I called Mr. Bell, her attorney, at 7:12 a.m. I called the funeral home. I called my mother last. The will reading was held 8 days later in Mr. Bell's conference room, a narrow space with camel-colored chairs, a wall of framed legal certificates, and the faint smell of copier toner. My mother wore black wool and pearl earrings that flashed every time she turned her head. Owen came late with a coffee cup in hand and no tie. Mr. Bell read slowly, because old lawyers understand that pace is part of authority. The final will and revocable trust amendment had been executed on June 14, witnessed by 2 paralegals and accompanied by a contemporaneous letter from my grandmother's primary care physician affirming her decisional capacity. My mother received a specific bequest of $250,000. Owen received $150,000. My grandmother's church music program received $100,000. A scholarship fund for women returning to school in bookkeeping, nursing, or accounting received $1 million. The lake house came to me. So did the residue of the estate, after taxes and administration, subject to the terms of the trust. I was named executor and trustee. My mother made no sound at first. Then she laughed once, quietly, like she'd heard a joke too bad to deserve a fuller reaction. This is absurd, she said. This is not what she wanted. Mr. Bell folded his hands. It is exactly what she signed. Owen's chair made a scraping sound against the floor. My mother turned toward me very slowly, and for one irrational second all I could smell was the coffee from his cup, bitter and dark and recent, cutting through the room. You had access, she said. You handled everything. There it was, not grief. Theory. I said nothing because I knew better than to litigate in a conference room before the papers had even been filed. Silent response is not weakness when you know what comes next. It is timing. 3 days later, she sued me. The petition landed on my front porch by certified mail in a cardboard-backed envelope that bent at the corner because the mail carrier had wedged it too hard into the box. I remember the sound of the envelope scraping against the brick as I pulled it free. The air outside smelled like wet leaves and chimney smoke. I stood in my entryway reading by the narrow strip of afternoon light coming through the side lights, my work bag still on my shoulder. Petition to invalidate will and trust amendment. Allegations of undue influence, lack of capacity, self-dealing, isolation, financial manipulation. She sought removal of me as executor, appointment of a special administrator, and an immediate freeze on distributions. Attached as an exhibit was a supposed earlier will, one that would have left the estate primarily to her. I set my bag down. I took off my shoes. I washed my hands, because ritual steadies me. Then I sat at my kitchen table and read every page twice. I want to pause here for a second, because this is the part of a story where people imagine rage as the most useful emotion, and it almost never is. I was hurt, yes, deeply. I was tired in a way that sat in my bones. I also knew exactly what kind of case she was trying to build and exactly how those cases failed. Not with speeches, with records, with timelines, with signatures, with the dull, devastating weight of corroboration. I did cry that night. I cried the way I hadn't cried since I was 8 years old, face down into a towel in my bathroom so the sound wouldn't echo off the tile. Then I washed my face, tied my hair back, and opened a new spreadsheet titled Ruth Albright Estate Contest Analysis. My mother's petition had 2 immediate problems, and I saw them before I finished the second tab. The first was the will she attached. The page numbering format was wrong. My grandmother's June 14 will used a footer format Mr. Bell's office had standardized 2 years earlier. Page X of Y aligned bottom right in Cambria 11 point. The earlier will my mother attached used Times New Roman, centered. That alone could have had an innocence explanation if it had truly been older. But the signature block referenced a trust amendment date that postdated the document by 7 months. Someone had cut and repurposed template language without understanding sequence. Fraud often hides in incompetence. So do desperate people. The second problem was timing. My mother alleged that my grandmother lacked capacity on June 14, the date of the final will execution. But I had personally driven my grandmother to Mr. Bell's office that morning, and I still had the parking receipt from the garage next door, because I expense and archive everything by habit. More importantly, my grandmother had attended a cardiology follow-up at 8:30 a.m. the same day, and the physician notes documented orientation, medication comprehension, and informed discussion of treatment options. Capacity is task-specific, but plaintiffs who throw around confusion often underestimate how many professional footprints elderly people leave in ordinary life. Then I saw the real problem. Attached to the petition as Exhibit C was a durable power of attorney purporting to authorize my mother to act on my grandmother's behalf starting 3 months before death. I had never seen it. The signature looked right at a glance and wrong upon contact, like hearing a familiar song played slightly off-key. There was too much pressure on the downstrokes. My grandmother had arthritis in her right hand by then. She did not write like that anymore. The notary seal belonged to a man named Raymond Pritchard, commission number partially visible in the stamp impression. Something about it needled me. I enlarged the scan on my laptop until the pixels broke. Expiration date, unclear. County, Madison. My grandmother had not been in Madison County on the signing date listed. She had been in Carmel for a pulmonary consult. I had the appointment summary in my files. That was the first moment the case stopped being an inheritance dispute and started looking like elder financial exploitation. The next morning, before sunrise, I drove to my grandmother's house with a travel mug of coffee cooling too fast in the cup holder and a yellow legal pad on the passenger seat. The house had not yet been emptied. It still smelled like cedar, lavender, and the faint medicinal sweetness of the hand lotion she used every night. I opened the cedar chest at the foot of her bed and saw the linen blue envelope where it had always been, tucked beneath 2 folded blankets and a box of old Christmas cards tied with satin ribbon. Under the envelope lay her red leather ledger. Inside were exactly what my grandmother had promised me years earlier when she taught me that paper remembers. A lifetime gift schedule written in her hand, copies of checks, sticky notes with dates of conversations, brokerage transfer confirmations, a list titled Support Provided to Diane After 2008 Refinance, a second list titled Owen Tuition Lease Vehicle. There was also a sealed note addressed to me in the same blue ink she used for birthday envelopes. If Diane contests, it read, show Mr. Bell the December ledger and the tenant file. She will claim confusion because confusion is useful to people who need a door where there is only a wall. My hands were completely steady while I read it. That is one of the strange things about training. People think evidence creates emotion. Often it suspends it. You become procedural first and human second because there is work to do. The December ledger was in the bottom drawer of her desk, wrapped in wax paper. The tenant file was in a hanging folder labeled Maplin 3RD, West CTs. The ledger contained line item entries of direct transfers to my mother over 19 years, cross-reference to bank account numbers and memo lines. Not estimates, not family lore, amounts, dates, purpose notes. It established a pattern that made the final will not only understandable, but rational. My grandmother had not disinherited her daughter. She had accounted for her. The tenant file held something worse. One of the commercial buildings generated rent from 4 small businesses, including a physical therapy office. In August, 2 months before my grandmother died, the tenant had mailed rent checks to a newly provided PO box after receiving an email from an address that looked, at a glance, like my grandmother's, 1 letter off. The file included a printed complaint email from the office manager saying the August deposit had not posted and asking for clarification. My grandmother had circled it in red and written, Diane, in the margin. I went cold then, not theatrically. Just a full-body stillness, as if every system in me had paused to preserve energy for what came next. I pulled bank records using the executor authority, Mr. Bell had already helped me lodge with the institutions. By noon, I had enough to see the outline. Between August and October, 4 rent payments totaling $18,400 had been diverted to an account my mother controlled at a regional credit union. Around the same time, there were brokerage cash withdrawals totaling $412,600, each purportedly authorized under the durable power of attorney I had never seen. 2 of the wire instructions were submitted on days my grandmother had been in either hospital or hospice. One transfer for $96,000 occurred at 9:12 a.m. On October 3, while she was receiving respiratory therapy at St. Vincent's, a fact documented in nursing notes and time-stamped medication administration records. I did not gasp. I created tabs: timeline, transfers, POA usage, suspect communications, supporting medical records, third-party corroboration. By 4 p.m., I had 19 open folders on my dining room table, and the smell of paper, coffee, and printer toner all around me. Outside, dusk had come down early. The windows reflected my kitchen back at me like another room where another woman was doing the same work. I called Mr. Bell first, then I called my lawyer. I called my lawyer sounds simple when you say it quickly, but in life it meant sitting in my car outside my office garage the next morning with the engine off and my phone in both hands, because once I said the facts aloud, the situation would become formally what it already was privately. His name was Julian Cross. He handled probate litigation and fiduciary breach cases, and he had the useful trait of never performing surprise for the comfort of a client. He met me that afternoon in a conference room that smelled faintly of leather chairs and dry erase marker. I brought 2 banker's boxes, my laptop, and a color-coded index. I watched his face while he reviewed the first set of documents, because lawyers tell you what matters long before they speak if you know how to read jaw tension and silence length. This is not just a will contest, he said finally. I know. You may have forgery, you may have theft from a protected adult. You definitely have concealment and conversion issues. I know. He looked up then, not unkindly. Do you want to settle if she offers to walk away quietly? No. He nodded once. That was the right answer, not because I wanted to punish my mother, but because quiet settlements are for disagreements. This had become recordable harm. For the next 6 weeks, my life turned procedural. We subpoenaed the notary log from Raymond Pritchard. We learned his commission had expired 11 months before the date on the power of attorney attached to my mother's petition. We obtained location records from St. Vincent's and appointment logs from her pulmonologist showing my grandmother elsewhere during the alleged execution time. Mr. Bell produced the original June 14 will, the trust amendment, witness affidavits, and a letter he had drafted immediately after the signing noting my grandmother's reasoning for the specific bequests. In a folder I had overlooked at first, he also had a video file of the execution ceremony, standard practice for contentious family situations. On the recording, my grandmother, dressed in a pale blue cardigan, identified the date, named her children and grandchildren, described her assets in broad terms, and explained in clear, unsentimental language that she had already provided substantial support to my mother and brother during her lifetime. She stated on camera that she wanted the child who documents, not the child who demands, to administer the estate. We hired a forensic document examiner named Dr. Melissa Fenwick, who wore silver reading glasses on a chain and spoke about pen pressure with the seriousness of a surgeon discussing vascular damage. She compared known signatures from my grandmother's cardiology records, trust amendments, check registers, and greeting cards to the signature on the power of attorney. Her report concluded, in clean, unadorned language, that the POA signature showed evidence of simulation rather than natural variation. In plain English, it had been forged. Then there was the deed. On November 2, a title officer called me because I had placed a monitoring alert on the lake house parcel number. The quitclaim deed transferring the lake house from my grandmother to an LLC named DMB Holdings had been recorded the day after her funeral. DMB were my mother's initials. The filing included the same suspect power of attorney. The recording fee had been paid with a debit card linked to Owen's business account. I remember standing in the parking lot behind my office with my phone to my ear while wind pushed the smell of diesel exhaust and cold rain through the alley. Cars moved in and out of the garage behind me. Somebody somewhere was loading a metal cart badly because it kept clanging against concrete. I closed my eyes and said, "Please email me the recording packet and certification." That was the moment I understood two things at once. First, my mother had not merely decided to sue me because she felt wounded by the will. She had been using the lawsuit as a screen while trying to reposition assets. Second, my brother was not a bystander. I wasn't interested in fighting. I was interested in winning. Julian and I built the case the way I build any forensic narrative, from the outside in and the inside out until both directions met cleanly in the middle. We created a master chronology down to the minute. June 14, 10:07 a.m., will execution at Bell and Harmon LLP, witness signatures logged. August 2, 3:16 p.m., tenant email redirect sent from spoofed address. October 3, 9:12 a.m., $96,000 transfer request submitted under suspect POA while respiratory therapy documented in hospital chart. November 3, 11:41 a.m., quitclaim deed recorded to DMB Holdings using same POA. We cataloged every exhibit and made duplicate sets. We had copies certified. We had the original POA stamp examined. We prepared an emergency petition to void the deed, a motion to preserve estate assets, and a referral packet for the county prosecutor's office. I did not confront my mother privately. That is another thing people often misunderstand. They think morality requires warning. It does not. Not when warning gives someone time to destroy evidence. She, meanwhile, grew warmer in direct proportion to her own anxiety. She texted me little half-domestic things she had never texted before. Have you eaten? Are you getting any rest? This is so hard on the family. Then, tucked beneath those questions, did Mr. Bell say when distributions might happen? Has the house at the lake been appraised recently? Have you considered mediation? The messages lit up my phone late at night while the dishwasher ran in my kitchen, and the smell of detergent and hot glass drifted through the room. I answered almost none of them. The court set a preliminary evidentiary hearing for December 12. My mother asked for a continuance, then withdrew the request when Julian declined to agree. She wanted an early mediation instead. So did her counsel, once he began to realize the papers she had handed him were not what she said they were. Julian suggested we allow a brief mediation session first, because sworn positions taken there and on the record shortly afterward could be useful. I agreed. That morning I dressed the way I do for expert testimony. Navy suit, low heels, hair pulled back, no jewelry except my watch. The courthouse lobby smelled like stone dust, wet wool, and coffee from the kiosk by security. My mother wore cream again, a choice I suspect was deliberate, because cream reads as innocence under fluorescent light. Owen had a beard he had not shaped correctly and a restless right leg that bounced under the mediation table hard enough to shake his water cup. The mediator, who had done this work for 30 years and had the gaze of a man who no longer believed family language softened business disputes, opened gently. Positions were stated. My mother, through counsel, reiterated undue influence, lack of capacity, and suspicious circumstances. She denied knowledge of any improper asset transfers. She characterized the power of attorney as routine. Owen said he had only helped with errands. I wrote down the time. When it was my turn to speak, I did not raise my voice. I said my name for the record. I said I was the named executor and trustee under the June 14 instruments. I said the estate's approximate value was $6.8 million, subject to administration. I said I had no interest in exchanging feelings about my grandmother's wishes because her wishes had been reduced to writing, witnessed, notarized where required, and supported by independent medical and legal documentation. Then I said, before any settlement discussion proceeds, I want the record to reflect that we have identified evidence of forged fiduciary authority, post-death deed transfer activity, and pre-death misappropriation of estate income. My mother's attorney took off his glasses. I'm sorry, he said. What exactly are you alleged? Julian slid the first exhibit across the table. We did not reveal everything at mediation. Only enough. The expired notary commission. The hospital records overlapping with the alleged POA execution. The title packet for the lake house transfer. The diverted rent payments. I watched my mother understand, in stages, that the floor beneath her legal strategy had not only cracked but disappeared. Owen stopped bouncing his leg. Still, she refused to withdraw. Pride is expensive. Some people pay with money. Some pay with freedom. The hearing itself is the moment most people want to hear about, and I understand why. We are trained by stories to expect the loud part to be the decisive part. In my experience, the decisive part is usually the prepared part. Probate Courtroom 2 had dark wooden benches, polished by years of use, and a wall clock that ticked more loudly than seemed necessary in a public building. The judge, Honorable Marissa Keene, had a reputation for impatience with dramatics and a particular contempt for sloppy filings. The gallery held perhaps 20 people that morning. 2 of my mother's church friends, a cousin I had not seen in 6 years, 3 law students, several unrelated litigants waiting for later matters, and the kind of courthouse regulars who sit in public rooms to witness other people's endings. The room smelled faintly of dust, paper, and winter coats damp from the snow beginning outside. My mother testified first. She said my grandmother had become forgetful. She said I had inserted myself into financial affairs. She said the June 14 will was inconsistent with family expectation. She said the power of attorney was authentic to the best of her knowledge. She said she had only acted to protect what my grandmother would have wanted. Then, under direct examination, she repeated the line she had used on me in one form or another for most of my life. She looked almost past me when she said it, as if I were still the useful girl at the side of the frame. Hannah has always been good with paperwork. It was meant as explanation. It landed as confession. Julian began calmly. He established my credentials, not because my professional status made me more truthful than anyone else, but because method matters. Then he asked my mother whether she disputed that my grandmother attended a cardiology appointment the morning of June 14. She did not know. Whether she disputed that 2 independent witnesses and an attorney were present for the will execution. She said she had concerns. Whether she had personal knowledge that the notary whose seal appeared on the POA held an active commission on the stated date. She said she assumed so. Assumption is a fragile thing under oath. Then came the exhibits. Exhibit 14 was the physician capacity letter. Exhibit 15 was the office sign-in log from Bell and Harmon. Exhibit 16 was the will execution video. The courtroom deputy dimmed the lights. On the screen, my grandmother appeared in her pale blue cardigan, eyes clear, voice steady. She stated her name, the date, the nature of the documents, and the reasons for her choices. When she reached the part about prior financial support, Julian paused the recording and moved to Exhibit 17. The lifetime transfer summary from the Red Ledger, corroborated by bank records. Line by line, year by year, the numbers accumulated. Mortgage cure, $84,000. Condo down payment, $210,000. Owen tuition and lease subsidies, $163,400. Tax lien assistance, $57,000. Business bridge loan, $125,000. Direct transfers and cashier's checks, many more after that. Total, $2,130,400. The room went silent, not figuratively, truly silent. Even the clock seemed to recede. My mother's face did something I had never seen it do before. It lost performance, no indignation, no wounded dignity. Just the abrupt, naked vacancy of someone who realizes a private mythology has met a public record and will not survive contact. Julian resumed. Exhibit 18, notary certification showing Raymond Pritchard's commission expired 11 months before the date on the purported POA. Exhibit 19, Dr. Fenwick's report on signature simulation. Exhibit 20, hospital respiratory therapy log, placing my grandmother elsewhere when one of the challenged transfers was submitted. Exhibit 21, county recorder packet for the quitclaim deed to DMB Holdings. Exhibit 22, bank records tracing diverted tenant rent into my mother's credit union account. Exhibit 23, debit card payment of the recording fee from Owen's business account. Each document was placed before the court in the same measured order we had rehearsed. No flourish, just sequence. When it was my turn on the stand, I spoke the way I always speak when explaining a schedule to a judge or a variance to a partner. I identified the spreadsheets I prepared. I explained source documents. I described controls, custody, and corroboration. I answered only the questions asked. I did not embellish. I did not speculate. At one point, my mother's attorney, looking grayer than he had that morning, asked whether I bore personal resentment toward my mother that might color my interpretation. I said no. Resentment is not a methodology. There was a small sound in the gallery then, not laughter exactly, but recognition. The judge asked one question herself. She held the forged POA between two fingers and looked at my mother over the bench. Mrs. Blake, she said, do you wish to continue maintaining the authenticity of this document in light of the evidence presented? My mother opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. No answer came. I looked at the blue envelope in front of me and thought, with a calm that surprised even me, she was right about one thing. I was good with paperwork. Judge Keene denied the petition from the bench. She found the June 14 will and trust amendment valid, found no credible evidence of undue influence, ordered immediate dismissal of the contest with prejudice, voided the quitclaim deed pending formal written order, restored full executor authority to me, and referred the matter to the county prosecutor and state attorney disciplinary intake for review of potential criminal and ethical violations arising from the forged fiduciary instrument and asset. Diversion. She also set a hearing on attorneys' fees and sanctions. The deputy clerk's keyboard clicks were the only sound for several seconds after the ruling. 20 people went silent, and the silence belonged to me. The fallout did not happen all at once. It unfolded through envelopes, notices, filings, and calls returned by other professionals. That is how consequences usually arrive when they are real. The prosecutor's office filed charges 3 months later. Against my mother, theft from a protected person, forgery, filing a false instrument, and attempted fraud in a probate proceeding. Against Owen, aiding in the filing of a false instrument and conversion relating to the lake house deed fee and diverted rent deposits. Their lawyers negotiated hard, then softer. Eventually, my mother entered a plea to reduced felony counts involving elder financial exploitation and false filing. Owen pleaded to a lesser aiding offense. She received a suspended sentence, 5 years of supervised probation, mandatory restitution of $412,600 plus statutory interest, and an order prohibiting her from serving in fiduciary roles. Her real estate license was suspended pending disciplinary review and later surrendered. Owen avoided jail but paid restitution jointly on the diverted rent, completed community service, and lost the sales job he'd been holding under a family friend who no longer wanted his company's name anywhere near a court record. The civil side was more expensive. Judge Keene awarded attorneys' fees and costs against my mother related to the will contest and deed litigation. The total, with expert fees, title work, transcript costs, and estate administration disruption, exceeded $286,000. The quitclaim deed to DMB Holdings was formally declared void ab initio. The court approved my petition to recover the diverted rent and surcharge the improper transfers. One brokerage institution, embarrassed by how easily the forged POA had been accepted, reimbursed part of the loss directly to the estate while pursuing its own internal claims. A bank compliance officer later called me to ask whether I would speak to their fraud prevention team about what red flags had been missed. I declined. I was not interested in becoming a case study while still living inside the aftermath. Social consequences moved through town faster than legal ones. Church women who had brought casseroles after my grandmother's funeral stopped calling my mother. Her holiday party, a fixture on her cul-de-sac for years, did not happen that December. People in Cedar Grove did what small-town people do when legal documents confirm what they had only half suspected. They revised old stories backward. Suddenly, everyone remembered uneasy loan requests, aggressive listing tactics, money troubles, dramatics around aging relatives. My mother's version of herself, which had long relied on confidence and volume, collapsed under citation. I did not watch my mother fall. I received reports. Sometimes it was a forwarded docket entry from Julian. Sometimes it was a clipped text from a cousin. Once it was Tom, my stepfather, leaving a voicemail so tired it sounded older than he was, saying only that he had moved into an apartment and would mail the extra keys to the lake house. I listened to the voicemail once and deleted it. Whatever grief belonged to his life was his to inventory. People expected me to feel triumphant. I didn't. I didn't feel vindicated. Vindication implies I needed them to be wrong for me to be right. I didn't. I just needed to be free. The first thing I did after the last appeal deadline passed was change the locks at the lake house. It was March then, cold but bright, with the kind of late winter sun that makes the water look metallic and flat. The locksmith's pick scratched softly in the old front lock while gulls cried somewhere out over the reservoir. Inside, the house smelled closed up, all stale wood, dust, and faint fireplace ash. My grandmother had spent summers there reading mystery novels in a wicker chair by the windows, and my grandfather had kept tackle boxes lined along the utility room wall in exact descending size. I stood in the front room while the locksmith worked and listened to the tumblers click over, one by one, until the deadbolt released with a sound so ordinary it almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny, because freedom is often quieter than people think. I kept the blue envelope. I did not lock it away. I framed the note my grandmother had written me, the one that said confusion is useful to people who need a door where there is only a wall, and I hung it in my home office above the low filing cabinet where I keep active case folders. Not as a trophy, as instruction. Nearby, in a deeper frame, I placed the first page of the court order voiding the deed and dismissing the contest with prejudice. The paper itself was plain, almost disappointingly so, black text on white stock, but there are documents that function like walls after years of living with doors nobody respected. The estate took another 11 months to administer fully. Assets were appraised, taxes addressed, tenant leases reviewed, distributions made. I could tell you every mechanical part of that process, because mechanics are where I am, see?